So I'll just introduce you to our panelists this evening. Just here we have Kristen Lewis. Kristen, yes, thank you. Kristen is the co-founder and managing director of Life Personal Trainers. They have 3 different, I guess, what do you call them, locations, studios around Adelaide. He is also a member of Fitness Australia Business Council and is a board member for Recreation SA. He has actually been a national level cyclist and rode 1,293 kilometres for Australia.
Oh, that deserves a hand.
Next in line we have here Darryl Cross. He is a personal and executive coach and founder of Crossways Consulting. Darryl has coached for 16 years and is also a registered psychologist. He's a member of the International Coach Federation. He's a fellow of the Australian Psychology Society and the Australian Institute of Management. He's also a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and is an author, university lecturer, and an international speaker. So it's great to have you here with us this evening. And Darryl is all about transforming people and organizations. So these 2 guys are valuable on our panel here tonight. And of course, we all know Sam now. Well, first I'm just going to let us get to know the panelists a little bit. Darryl, you are constantly working with people to make change. What are the most common difficulties with change that you've encountered?
I'm reminded of the saying, life rewards action, not good intentions. And most of us get stuck in good intentions. And the reason we get stuck there is that there's a basic human need, and it's called security, it's called certainty. And we don't like to move out of that comfort zone called security and certainty. Because once we move out of that zone, it takes massive energy, intellectually and emotionally, to create a new neurological pathway called a routine. Because basically life is about creating good routines. So the issue is you can call yourself lazy and people come in and they say I'm lazy or I'm not unmotivated. No, that's not quite true. It's the fact that it creates massive energy to turn the ship around. And most of us don't want to devote that mental energy and that emotional energy to what is a fairly significant shift for us personally and at a very basic need level.
Change is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Kristen, you also work with people to make change. In your experience, what is the prominent thing that people want to change?
I guess so. People are turning up to us to change their health largely. So they turn up with perhaps some concrete goals or recognising that the way their health is heading isn't great. Maybe because someone's close to them has had a health issue, or maybe they've been told by their doctor they need to make a change. They're largely coming to us to try and establish some new routines and seeking advice on how to do that.
Thanks. So we've got a lot of experience sitting here. And just to get you to know each of you well, can you please share with us some time that you've had to make a big change in your life?
Oh, right. Okay. Does that include Sam?
Oh, yes.
Oh, well, Sam, why don't you go first?
Oh, wow. I've had a lot. Moved around a lot. I was born in Hong Kong, spent 2 years in Darwin, 6 years in Adelaide, and then moved to Sydney. And I remember as a child not coping well with those changes. The move from Adelaide to Sydney, I remember finding very hard as an 8-year-old. Then I was a full-time doctor, changed from that to theology, so that was a big change. And then, I'll just stop there. There's a lot.
So lots of travelling and changing.
Yep.
And that kind of cues me too, because back in the 70s I moved from Adelaide to University of Queensland to do a doctorate. And I remember thinking at the time, gee, I'm really glad they speak English here. because it was like a massive shift, and you didn't even know where to get a carton of milk and basic stuff. It was really out of the comfort zone. So that was a big shift. And I remember the other one was starting up a private practice, because I actually came back to Adelaide and worked as a director at the Women's and Children's Hospital. And really, for those of you who are involved in bureaucracy, there's a great training movie by John Cleese, and you'll excuse the title. It's called Meetings, Bloody Meetings. And it really is about bureaucracy. And I thought, I've had enough of this. I'm going to move out of this safe environment and start a practice. And that was really mind-shifting in a very big way.
Yeah, I guess I've had. There's two that I was thinking of. Yeah, definitely one was starting a business, and I guess just prior to starting that business, I was going down the path of trying to become a professional athlete. So, shutting that door, doing some soul searching, and then launching into business was a massive change. Fortunately, a lot of the skills for being a professional athlete are similar to the skills required for business. And I think the other one that I can think of was the birth of our first child. And I thought I was all over that change. And my wife and I, we once a year go to Melbourne and have a bit of a shopping and eating session for a couple of nights. So we took little Frankie along with us, and I sort of thought, we're not going to be able to do any 8-course degustations. It's going to be more just some takeaway food. And I brought a couple of bottles of red in the suitcase for dinner. And anyway, we sat there the first night and then realised that we'd only got a 1-bedroom apartment. So we put the baby to sleep, and then we both sat there with the lights off, unable to talk, drinking wine out of plastic cups, and that's when the change dawned on me.
That's a significant change. And I guess changes that probably many of us can relate to sitting in this room. Now, we've all heard from Sam, and you've given us a lovely presentation about thinking through change and how that impacts on our life. Kristen and Darryl, would you like to make any comments on what he said?
Well, it's difficult to know where to start. I really think that change is about, and I like the biblical passage, and I can't remember where it is, Sam, so maybe you can help me. But it's about the transforming of your mind. And I'm in the business of transforming people's minds, because ultimately that's what's controlling us in what we do. And in the transforming of the mind, the heart gets transformed. And I kind of moved on from what you were saying about some of the change factors. And for me, it is that it's counterintuitive in a sense. And I get that. And the Bible's full of paradoxes, back to front rules. First shall be last. You go, what? Give me a break. But, it's those rules that are really very fundamental to life. So I think it's about transforming of your mind. And I think the gospel message helps us get that in perspective. And I think God's Spirit, as he works through our mind, and if we allow that to happen, we get a different orientation on life. We get a different perspective on life, that life is not all about us, that we're not the centre of the universe. So it's that kind of perspective, I think, that really does allow that transformation. And then your character gets transformed. So your mind and your thoughts, ultimately your character gets transformed. And I think that is a beautiful thing, a really beautiful thing.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think for me, probably the big one that I was thinking about as Sam was talking was just the concept of counter-narrative. So, yeah, I guess as a Christian, sort of, it constantly surprises me how much I get pulled one way by the different things that come across my desk every day, by the things that are marketed to us every day. And I guess, going back to that counter-narrative, as Darryl mentioned, the first shall be last, last shall be first, and all these sort of strange concepts that I guess as a Christian sort of I'm trying to embrace. So that was really interesting.
Great. Well, we're talking here about lots of changing and counter-narrative. Darryl, how can we figure out when it's good change or when it's time to resist change?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it's, will this change allow me to grow? Because one of the basic needs that we have, human needs, and I speak as a psychologist, one of them is that we need to grow. Because anything that doesn't grow on the planet dies. I mean, it's a law of the planet. I didn't make that up and you didn't make that up. It just is. And so we need to grow. We need to develop. So the question I'd be asking is, will this allow me to grow? Will this allow me to develop? What will I learn from this? Because I need to grow and develop. And if I think that moving out of my comfort zone isn't going to tick that box of growth and personal development, then probably I put a question mark across it.
So there needs to be a reason, basically.
There always needs to be a reason, because the reason pulls you through. The reason pulls you through. Sure, there might be something back there called a punishment or something that's pushing you, but the goal or the purpose or the meaning pulls you through.
So in having a meaning, Kristen, lots of people come to see you because they have already decided to change. What kind of success rate do you see with that?
I think most of our clients are still with us, so I guess that means that they're happy. It's a really difficult question. I guess our business is based on long-term relationships. I think it's about really understanding what people want when they first turn up. So I think going back to Darryl's comments before, you need to have that vision of where they want to be to pull them through that change. And I think it's my job to challenge that vision a little bit, to make sure it is actually what they want, because sometimes people don't realise they've got the vision, but they haven't drilled down to the implications of that. So if you want to improve your health, you're going to have to put some time into exercise. That means you're either sleeping less, watching less TV, hanging out with your family less, working less. So there's an implication for that time. So I think getting that right from the start probably goes a long way to that person succeeding, and some good accountability along the way.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And we'll swing around to you, Sam. So you've mentioned a lot that Jesus talks about change and turns things on its head. How can that matter to us at work today?
All right. Well, it's interesting that Darryl was saying we always need a reason, a cause, a purpose. I read a lot of New York Times bestsellers books, and I'll give you an example. There's Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit. How can you change from a bad habit to a good habit? In the end, he says you need a purpose, a cause, a reason, a transcendent cause, a transcendent purpose. There's a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit. It's on how to have passion and perseverance to make sure you reach your goals. Well, how can you reach your goals? In the end, she says, well, it's actually not just passion and perseverance. You need purpose and hope. Stephen Biddulph, in his book on manhood, and in his book he's got chapters on how to be a good father, a good husband, a good worker. His last chapter is on spirituality. In other words, you need transcendent purpose and hope. So somehow all these books, Christian and not Christian books, are saying the same thing. In the end, you need a bigger story than just your own story, someone else than just yourself to live for. You need transcendent purpose. And that's what Jesus gives us. He gives us transcendent purpose. So what's interesting, without Jesus, you're always just moving the goalpost back and back and back. So, for example, if you ask my wife and I, why are we together? We might say, for the children. That's the purpose. But then you might say, well, why for the children? Then we'll have to say, so they can be happy. And then you can say, but why do you want them to be happy? So they can be successful. Then you can say, well, why do you want them to be successful? So they can have lots of money. Well, why do you want that? And bit by bit you realise it's an ever-receding thing unless I can actually escape my own storyline and say there's a Jesus we're living for, someone I'm living for and someone living for me, and that's the purpose that will give me the power to change and embrace the new change in my life.
Okay, kind of following on from that, we've received a question from the audience. Because you're talking about Jesus being the answer, they say, what if well, change is stressful. So how do you use Jesus as the answer when change is stressful and it challenges the things that I value?
All right. So change is stressful. It's interesting that it all goes all the way back to the Greeks. They had a debate, is reality being or becoming? Can you step into the same river twice? And of course, the river's never the same twice. The water's moved on, the molecules are changing. The river is never the same. So change is a reality. We're always becoming, we're never being. And that stresses us because there is no constancy, there's no reality. And they say, as much as we need change, we need ritual and routine. So they say, actually, we need a fine balance in life between rituals of maintenance, some sort of routine where we feel stability and security, but we also need rituals of disruption and change because that will make us stronger. But if all of this is what we have, we wither away, we don't grow, we don't flourish. But if this is all we have, change and disruption, it will break us. We can only handle so much change at a time. So we need both. And it's interesting, Jesus gives us both. Because on the one hand, he says, come to me, I will be your rest, I will be your security. So he will never change. So he's always someone who will live for us and we can live for him. But at the same time, he says, I love you just the way you are. That's our security. But then he says, I love you too much to leave you the way you are. So there's a journey in which he's going to transform us and make us more and more like Jesus. Because he says, come. Follow me. There's a journey, there's an adventure. And I remember someone said that's a key to life, seeing Jesus as the adventure and not the other things in your life. So if I make my wife the adventure in my life, I will break her because I'll ask too much from her. And then I'll blame her. Oh, if only you were more exciting, more beautiful. And I might blame myself. If only I was more witty, more intelligent, more charming. If I try to put the stress on me or her to be the adventure, instead, if I have Jesus as the adventure and my wife is the person I bring along with me in the journey, that's what will keep us together and that's what will allow us to thrive. So if we can live for Jesus, he's someone that will always forgive us. He will never fail us. But if we live for anything else, it will own us and destroy us or we will destroy it.
Okay, thanks. We've just had a very practical question come through. I'll throw it to the entire panel, whoever wants to answer it. What do I say to a young staff member who has been made redundant as part of an efficiency program, which I have to manage?
That's always really, really tough. And I think on the one part, you've really got to show some empathy and some understanding because I wouldn't like to be in that position either. And I think that really is about saying, you know what, this is tough, this isn't probably right, this probably isn't fair. I get all of that. But you know what? When one door closes, another door opens. And I often say to my clients, that kind of situation is almost like you've been pushed out of the plane and you didn't want that, and then you start to free fall. And in the free fall, you're panicking like blazes. Your brain is going, wah! In the free fall. But in the free fall, it actually allows you to also look at the horizon and look at the possibilities that you never saw from inside the plane. So even though you've been pushed, even though it's scary and your brain is going AWOL on you, understand that I never lost a client without the parachute being pulled. Somewhere along the line, you come through via discussions, via mentoring, via opportunities, doors open, you will come through, you will survive the experience, even though it's probably your worst nightmare right now. And I think it's that finally coming through the loop and finally gaining acceptance. And I would want to encourage them, but understand their pain right now, but understand the bigger picture here, that there will be something at the end. You won't die through this experience.
Can I just talk to that too? I mean, how many stories have we heard about people in those situations? And when you say to this person later on in life, well, why did you start your business? Well, I got made redundant, and so suddenly, Darryl was talking at the start about the fact that a lot, we find change difficult. It requires energy. We're more satisfied with the status quo. But here's a situation that's out of your control, which forces you to look at all options and actually look up. That most of us we wouldn't have voluntarily put ourselves there. We normally run away from pain, not towards it.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the number of clients that have come back to me, and it's generally after 12 months. It's not in the 12-month period, but it'll be 2 years, 3 years, and say, you know what, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I would never have left that company. I would never have left that career, but they actually did me a favour. I wouldn't have believed it back then, but wow, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, the best thing that ever happened to me. And it's because we allow ourselves the opportunity to scan and look at opportunities. And that's a real blessing.
Okay, thank you. We actually have another one for you, Darryl. On the need for motivation or reason to pull as the reason to pull through, does that mean that you can make a bad change for you or for others that benefits you? What if a business or person makes a good change for a bad reason or a bad change for a good reason?
The answer is yes. Definitely yes. Some change can be bad, and it's often because we are egocentric and it's all about us, and we don't consider often the wider picture or the wider purpose, and we can sometimes act in a very, I guess, selfish way. That means that we can make decisions that are not in our best interests.
Well, there's no right or wrong answer. It's a complex question, but it's interesting because in the Bible, there are a lot of good changes that happen from poor motives. And that's part of, and from evil actions. And I guess that's part of the thing, again, talking about what you were talking about before, that when change is forced upon us, often it's unfair change, unjust change, and rightly we can get angry. But then we can see God's wisdom that he actually redeems bad actions, redeems unjust actions, and brings good out of it. So he brings good change out of unjust motives. So that does happen, and that's where you see this wisdom in the way God works. And the other one, can good change happen out of bad motives? Well, no, that was the other one. Bad change with good motives. Well, Aristotle will say, well, at least he gave it a go, and motivation is a big part of a moral action. And, they say you got to fail 20 times to get one good result. So fail quickly, you gave it a go, good on you. I actually forgot to mention, I lived 5 years in America. That was a big change for me. And I noticed the complete differences in Americans versus Australians. Americans were proactive, and that's what gave them their freedom. Australians, we did nothing and our freedom got handed to us. So it's almost like we've been taught, just maintain the status quo, don't rock the boat and everything go well. Whereas Americans have been taught, no, you got to rock the boat. Otherwise, status quo is unacceptable. So I lived in Chicago where they reversed the flow of the Chicago River just because they thought they could, and that was at the turn of the century. They had to raise the level of Lake Michigan to make it happen. And it seems like in Australia, if you try to do something, well, I'll give you an example. In America, every time an explorer went west, it went well for them. In Australia, every time an explorer went inland, it went bad for them. They died and there was no water. They were wasting their time. And so in Australia, we've been taught, if you try to make something happen and you fail, everyone goes, well, what were you thinking? You're an idiot. Serves you right for trying. In America, it's like, well, good on you. At least you had a go. It's a very different way of seeing things.
I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up the panel. Thank you for all your questions. I know we haven't gotten to all of them. We will have a little bit of time afterwards where you can speak with the panelists individually. But can you give us your top tip about managing change?
I'll start first if you like. I might come at it from the context that I work in, where people are coming in voluntarily and they want to make change. So I guess something that a little formula that I've found is really helpful to look at any change in your life. The 3 words: plan, execute, and review. So when you're wanting to make a change, obviously spending time on the front end, planning for that, working out what could go wrong, what could go right, the various opportunities. Then obviously you then go through to an execution phase where you're just trying to do it and make it happen. And then at some point after that, you should actually step away from it and spend time reviewing how it's gone and what's working well, what's not working well. And I guess that then kicks you off into the next cycle of plan, execute, review, and so it goes on.
That's great. Thanks. Plan, execute, review.
Let me build on that, and that's a really good way of explaining it. I think change for me is moving from the comfort zone into the courage zone. When you move from the comfort zone into the courage zone, you're going to experience anxiety. That's just human nature. Get used to it. You need to feel the anxiety in order to grow. And in the growth is your development, and your comfort zone gets enlarged because that becomes your growth factor. Now, what's really important in this growth is when you feel anxious, I love the saying that says, feel the fear and do it anyway. In the growth, you never go in a straight line to your goal. You always zigzag to your destination as you're moving across the courage zone. So get used to the fact that life is a zigzag. And at various points, you'll check the wind, you'll check the tide, you'll check the currents, and you'll go, another tack needed into the courage zone. And so you will zigzag to your destination. So understand this. It's about feeling anxious and doing it anyway in the courage zone, and you zigzag to your destination by using Kristen's checking and rechecking and maybe doing another tack. That's the review part of this change process. Life is never a straight line. In fact, I was really blown away by a speaker who once asked the audience, the Apollo craft from NASA, how much was that craft on the exact route to the moon, to Mars? Now, where was it? Moon. Yeah, moon. It was right. To the moon. How much of the time was it right on track? Of course, none of us knew. The answer was it was on track from NASA 3% of the time. What was it doing the rest of the time? It was correcting. It was zigzagging to its destination. You and I are like the Apollo craft. We're not going to be right on track, but as long as we're moving forward and we're zigzagging, chances are, and we're reviewing, we're going to get there. And that's a good story.
Thanks. Sam?
Well, for me, embrace change, because as long as you have Jesus, you can cope with whatever change comes your way. There's a book called The Black Swan, and it's exactly what Darryl was saying. All the good changes, all the good discoveries happened accidentally, like people were trying to go this way, and whatever they discovered came laterally. They weren't even looking for it. Like penicillin is the best example. So the thesis of the book, just do anything, because who knows what's going to happen. Aim for that and you're going to find something else, but you're not going to find anything by doing nothing. So for me, embrace the change, embrace the chaos.
Please do thank our panelists.